The camera fades in, the city skyline shimmering under the bright neon glow of Manhattan. The bustling energy of New York pulses through the streets, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos inside a late-night TV studio. The Carlton Unfiltered set is bathed in bright, artificial lights, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. Tonight, like every other night, Graham Carlton, the self-proclaimed king of late-night television, is at his desk, ready to do what he does best: tear into public figures with wit sharper than a razor blade. For years, Carlton has thrived on controversy. No one is safe. Not Hollywood A-listers, not billionaires, not politicians, and certainly not the Trump family. He leans forward, a sly smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth as he flips through his cue cards. The audience is primed and ready, laughing before the punchline even drops. They know how this works. It's a ritual. The setup, the insult, the applause. But tonight, something is different. Carlton pauses for effect, then drops the line that sets everything in motion. "Let's talk about Melania Trump, shall we?" The crowd chuckles on cue. Carlton grins, knowing exactly where he's taking this. I mean, come on. What did she actually do? Was she a first lady or just a very expensive mannequin in designer heels? Laughter erupts. Carlton feeds off it, stretching the moment. He waves his hands dramatically. "Be best, please. That wasn't a movement. That was a hashtag." The audience roars. Another win. Another perfectly executed takedown. But one person isn't laughing. Sitting quietly in the front row, Barron Trump's hands are clasped tightly together, his expression unreadable. At just 18 years old, he's spent most of his life in the shadows of his father's presidency, avoiding the spotlight, sidestepping controversy. Unlike the rest of his family, he's never clapped back at critics, never engaged in the media circus. But tonight? Tonight is different. Because this isn't just about politics. This isn't about his last name. This is about his mother, a woman who had endured endless scrutiny, mocked, belittled, reduced to nothing more than an image, and now, right in front of him, she was being turned into a punchline again. A camera pans over the audience, accidentally landing on Barron's face. For a split second, the world sees something new, a shift, a flicker of something beneath the surface. Then he stands up. The laughter dies instantly. The energy in the room shifts. For the first time in his career, Graham Carlton is caught off guard. And just like that, everything changes. What happens next? Stay tuned, because this is a moment that will be talked about for years to come. Before we continue, if you love bold storytelling, if you enjoy narratives that challenge the way we think, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, because this is just getting started. The silence is deafening. Just seconds ago, the studio had been alive with laughter, applause, the high-energy chaos of late-night entertainment. Graham Carlton, ever the showman, had the audience eating out of the palm of his hand. Everything was going exactly as planned. Until now. Until Barron Trump. The quiet one, the reserved one, the one who had never before stepped into the fray, stood up. At first, no one knows how to react. Carlton, still perched at his desk, tilts his head slightly, trying to gauge the moment. He's used to control. He dictates the pace. He crafts the jokes. He owns the stage. But now, an unplanned variable has entered the equation, and the atmosphere has shifted. In the audience, a few people glance at each other, uncertain. They recognize him, of course. He's been a background figure in American politics for years, always there, but never speaking. The cameras catch the flicker of unease in Carlton's eyes, but he recovers quickly. He leans forward, a practiced smirk on his face. Well, he drawls, voice dripping with amusement. "Looks like we've got a Trump in the house, ladies and gentlemen." A few scattered laughs. Not as many as before. Barron doesn't move. Doesn't blink. His expression is unreadable. Carlton chuckles, shifting in his chair. "Wasn't expecting a guest appearance tonight, but hey, let's roll with it." "What's on your mind, kid?" The audience waits. Barron reaches for the microphone, and when he speaks, his voice is steady, clear, controlled. "You talk about my mother as if she's just an image." The room tightens, as if she's nothing more than a headline, a punchline. Carlton's smirk fades. Just a little. "But tell me, Mr. Carlton, do you actually know anything about the woman behind the name?" Dead silence. The power dynamic of the room shifts so fast it's almost whiplash-inducing. Carlton opens his mouth ready to respond, but for the first time in his career, he hesitates. Because this wasn't what he expected. This wasn't anger. This wasn't a tantrum. This was something else. The audience is locked in, completely still, waiting for Carlton's response. Waiting to see if he can control the moment the way he always does. And he tries. "Whoa, kid, relax," Carlton begins, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "It's just a joke. That's what we do here, we joke." Barron doesn't flinch. A joke? His tone is neutral, almost amused. Carlton nods. Trying to keep it light, trying to bring the audience back to his side. "Yeah, you know, humor? Satire? It's what late-night TV is built on, buddy." Barron exhales slowly, nodding. "I see. So it's just humor." His gaze flickers toward the audience. "Tell me, how many times do you think my mother has heard this same joke? 100? 1,000? How many times has she been reduced to just a pretty face while men like you laughed at her expense?" Carlton blinks. This is not going the way he planned. The audience shifts, suddenly aware of something they hadn't considered before. The cameras pan across the room, catching expressions that range from discomfort to curiosity. People are listening in a way they weren't before. Barron doesn't stop. "You say it's just a joke, but jokes have power. Words have power." He steps forward, not aggressively, but deliberately. And suddenly, Carlton isn't the one in control anymore. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Carlton. If my mother had been a different kind of first lady, louder, more outspoken, more aggressive, would you respect her more? If she had raised her voice to match the noise around her, would you have taken her more seriously?" The question hangs in the air. Carlton doesn't have an answer. Because for years, the media, his media, had mocked Melania Trump for being too quiet, too polished, too poised, for not being enough. And now standing before him was her son, forcing him to confront that contradiction in real time. For a moment the audience is no longer entertained, they are engaged, they are thinking, and Carlton feels it. The loss of control, the unraveling of his usual routine. He clears his throat, shifting in his chair. "Kid, listen. My name is Barron." The correction is calm, sharp, unshakable. Carlton hesitates. This is not the conversation he wanted to have, but it's happening anyway. And the audience? They are watching every second of it. What happens next? Barron isn't done yet. Graham Carlton is backed into a corner, and for the first time in his career, he might not be able to joke his way out of it. Before we continue, if this moment got you thinking, hit that like button, drop a comment below. Do you think late-night TV crosses the line too often? And most importantly, subscribe, because what happens next, you don't want to miss it. The tension in the studio is thick enough to cut with a knife. The once rowdy crowd is silent now, the energy shifting from late-night laughter to something heavier, more serious. They're not just watching a show anymore. They're witnessing something real. Graham Carlton is still gripping the edge of his desk, trying to maintain his usual cool, but it's slipping. He knows it. The audience knows it. And Barron Trump. He's not backing down. Carlton tries to take control again. Carlton forces a smirk, attempting to reclaim the room. All right, he says, waving a dismissive hand. "I get it. You're upset. But let's be real here. Your family is one of the most powerful families in the world. Your dad was literally the president. And you're telling me we can't joke about them?" The crowd murmurs, some nodding. Carlton sees his opening. You know who really gets made fun of? Regular people. They don't have PR teams or private jets or millions of supporters defending them. Your mom? She'll be just fine. I mean, she married a billionaire. I think she can handle a few late-night jokes. A few uneasy chuckles ripple through the audience. For a moment, Carlton looks like he might have regained control. But then Barron tilts his head slightly, watching him, studying him, and when he speaks, it's not with anger. It's something else, something quieter, more piercing. Barron flips the narrative. You think this is about wealth? His voice isn't raised, but it carries. You think my mother's silence means she doesn't feel? That because she's married to a powerful man, she stops being human? Carlton shifts slightly in his seat. Barron steps forward again, closing the distance between them. What you don't understand, Mr. Carlton, is that power doesn't make you immune to pain, to mockery, to being reduced to nothing more than an easy punchline. It just means the whole world is watching while it happens. The audience is dead silent now. Carlton opens his mouth, ready with a rebuttal, but Barron doesn't give him the chance. Let's talk about power, shall we? His gaze sweeps the room before locking back onto Carlton. Because if we're talking about power, let's talk about you. Carlton blinks. Me? Yes, you. Barron continues. You sit there, night after night, deciding who is worthy of respect and who is worthy of ridicule. You build people up, you tear them down, and the audience laughs because that's the game, right? That's the machine you run. Carlton's smirk fades completely now, because suddenly, the conversation isn't about Melania Trump anymore. It's about him. But here's my question, Mr. Carlton, Barron says, tilting his head. When do you ever stop to think about the weight of your words? Carlton doesn't answer, because the truth is, he never does. The shift in the room. The audience is leaning in now, caught in something they didn't expect to care about this much. And Barron? He's in control. You say it's just jokes. But jokes shape narratives, narratives shape perception, and perception? It becomes reality. Carlton swallows hard, shifting again in his chair. He knows where this is going. You mocked my mother because she wasn't loud enough. Because she didn't play the game the way others did. But did you ever stop to ask why? The air is electric. Did you ever think that silence isn't weakness? He lets the words sit. Maybe silence is just dignity in a world that rewards noise. Carlton looks away for the first time all night. Barron's closing strike. You've built a career out of speaking your mind, Barron continues, and that's your right. But let me ask you something, Mr. Carlton. The camera zooms in. The audience holds their breath. If, decades from now, people look back at what you've built, will they remember the jokes? A beat. Or will they remember the damage? Carlton exhales sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. That one hit. The crowd? They're staring at him now, not as a comedian, but as a man who has never had to answer for the power he wields. And for the first time in his career, Graham Carlton has nothing to say. The moment that breaks everything. The silence stretches long enough that Carlton finally lets out a forced chuckle, shaking his head. Damn, kid, he mutters, rubbing the back of his neck. Didn't see that one coming. It's not an apology, but it's the closest thing to one he's ever given. And the audience? They clap, not for Carlton, for Barron. Because somehow in the span of a few minutes, he turned the most feared man in late-night TV into the one on the defensive. And everyone felt it. The fallout. What happens next? This wasn't just another talk show moment. This was a shift. And the aftershocks? They're only beginning. Do you think late-night TV has too much power? Do comedians cross the line too often? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you love bold storytelling like this, hit that like button and subscribe. Because trust me, this story, it's not over yet. Up next, Barron Trump walks out of the studio, but the conversation is only just beginning. Want me to write the next part? Let's keep this story going. For a long moment, the studio remains frozen in time. No laughter, no quick-witted comeback, just silence. The same stage where Graham Carlton had humiliated celebrities, shredded politicians, and mocked public figures for years was now the stage where he sat in stunned silence, confronted with a reality he had never been forced to face before. Barron Trump doesn't smirk, doesn't gloat. He simply lets the weight of his words settle. Not just on Carlton, but on everyone in the room, because this was never about just one joke. This was about the culture behind it. The audience is still processing what they just witnessed. Many of them came expecting comedy, an easy laugh at the expense of someone who wasn't in the room to defend themselves. But now they're realizing they had been a part of something bigger, something uglier. And suddenly, it doesn't feel so funny anymore. Carlton shifts uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time in his career, he isn't the one leading the conversation. He exhales, rubbing his jaw. Then, forcing a grin, he leans back in his chair and shakes his head. All right, kid, he says, his voice softer now. I'll admit, you got me thinking. It's not an apology, not quite, but it's something. And for someone like Graham Carlton, that's rare. Barron's final words. Barron nods once, his expression unreadable. Then, in the same steady, unshaken voice that had just dismantled a television powerhouse, he speaks again. I don't need you to agree with me, Mr. Carlton. He pauses. I just needed you to listen. The room goes completely still. Because that was the real message. Not about one joke. Not about one person. But about how we treat people when we think they're not listening. The audience exhales. Something about those words hits deeper than any argument could. Carlton studies him for a second. He could fire back, he could regain control, but he doesn't. Instead, he just nods. Because he knows he lost this one. The walkout. The power shift is completely safe without. Another word, Barron turns, hands the microphone back to the stagehand and walks off the stage. He doesn't wait for applause, doesn't wait for validation because he doesn't need it. But the audience? They erupt, not in wild, raucous cheers, but in something more meaningful, more real. It's not just applause, it's respect. Even Carlton, still sitting at his desk, lets out a low breath, shaking his head as he watches Barron disappear backstage. Damn, he mutters under his breath, just loud enough for the mic to pick it up. The cameras catch the shift in his expression, not anger, not frustration. Reflect, and that's when everyone realizes. This wasn't just a moment. This was a turning point. The internet explodes. By the time Barron reaches the backstage exit, the moment is already viral. Clips flood Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Barron Trump moment. Respect over ridicule. Late night gone too far. Headlines break within minutes. Graham Carlton finally meets his match. And it's an 18-year-old Barron Trump breaks silence, dominates late-night showdown. Did late-night TV just change forever? And the reactions? They're explosive. Half the internet praises Barron, calling him poised, intelligent, a voice his generation didn't see coming. The other half? They turn on Carlton. And for the first time ever, the late-night king, the man who had built an empire on mocking others, is the one under scrutiny. People start digging. How often had his jokes gone too far? How many times had he crossed the line? Suddenly the people who once laughed without thinking are thinking. And that's what makes this moment historic. The fallout. Graham Carlton faces the consequences. The next night, Graham Carlton walks onto his set. The energy is different. The audience isn't as loud. They're waiting. For the first time in years, Carlton doesn't start with a joke. He exhales, rubs the back of his neck, and finally looks into the camera. Last night was different, he says. I've spent my career talking, but last night, I listened. He pauses. The room is pin-drop silent. And maybe it's time we all start thinking about the way we talk about people. The way we reduce them to headlines, to hashtags, to jokes. The audience isn't sure how to react. Carlton just lets the moment sit. Because this time, there is no punchline. The takeaway? More than just a viral moment. This wasn't about Barron versus Carlton. This wasn't just about one joke, one show, one late-night segment. This was about something much bigger. For years, society had treated public figures, especially women, especially first ladies, as punchlines, not people. And Barron Trump, of all people, had just forced the world to acknowledge it. Because he didn't just defend his mother, he changed the conversation. And in doing so, he changed the game. What happens next? Late-night TV is under scrutiny. The media is forced to rethink its role. And Barron Trump, he just became a name that people won't forget. Now it's your turn. Do you think late-night TV goes too far? Should comedians be held accountable for their jokes? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. Hit that like button if you think this moment mattered. Subscribe, because we're just getting started. Because sometimes, the quietest voices end up making the loudest impact. Want more? Barron Trump's impact is just beginning. Should I cover what happens next? Let me know in the comments. The night the episode aired, no one could have predicted the ripple effect. What had started as just another late-night monologue, a throwaway segment meant to entertain, had turned into a national conversation. And at the center of it, Barron Trump. A name that had, for years, existed in the background of political headlines. A quiet figure in a loud world. But not anymore. Because this time, he wasn't just the son of a former president. He was the young man who stood up and changed the conversation. The cultural shift, a reckoning for late-night TV. For years, late-night television had thrived on mockery. Public figures were reduced to punchlines, their humanity an afterthought. But not anymore. After Barron's viral moment, people started questioning everything. When did comedy become cruel? The New York Times, is late-night TV still relevant? The Atlantic. Barron Trump forces America to rethink media culture. Politico Graham Carlton, once untouchable, found himself in an unfamiliar position. On the defensive. For the first time in his career, he wasn't just a comedian. He was a symbol of an outdated industry struggling to evolve. And the public? They were paying attention. Viewers started tuning out, not just from Carlton's show, but from the entire late-night format, because suddenly people were asking, are we really entertained by tearing people down? And that question, it changed everything. Barron Trump's next move, silence or action? Meanwhile, Barron himself stayed quiet. No press tour, no follow-up interviews, no capitalizing on the moment. And that made the moment even bigger. Because in a world where everyone fights for attention, choosing silence is a statement in itself. But then, 2 weeks later, he made his first move. Not a TV appearance, not a political speech, instead, a single post on social media. Words matter. How we treat people matters. I hope we all remember that. Simple, powerful, and instantly, it reignited the conversation. The legacy of the moment. A new kind of influence. Barron Trump didn't seek this moment. He didn't plan to become a voice for something bigger, but sometimes, history finds you anyway. This wasn't about left or right, politics or partisanship. This was about something deeper. Respect, humanity. The way we use our voices. Because in the end, it wasn't just a moment that went viral. It was a mirror held up to society. And the reflection made people think. What's next? Did Barron Trump just reshape how we think about public discourse? Is late-night TV finally evolving? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have the conversation. Like this video if you believe words matter. Subscribe for more stories that challenge the norm, because sometimes, the most powerful voices aren't the loudest. They're the ones that speak when it truly matters.